Long strips of fabric dyed in many colors were hung high from the wooden stacks, some ghastly white, some filthy. It had been a long time since anyone last touched them. Kolizhen crouched next to a large black vat of dye and became singularly fixated on the contents. The fluid had a funny color and emitted a strange smell. Shilian was afraid that he was going to dip his finger in and lick it at any second, so he hastily dragged him away. Outside in the yard, a band of ghosts were bound by a single iron chain, and they crouched low, hugging their heads. This is, Shilian wondered. All the nefarious creatures guilty of selling the Brigade Immortal in Ghost City are here, as are those who attempted to use it in anywhere nearby. The ghost-masked man answered. A total of 98 pieces of clothing have been collected. 98 pieces, and they must all have been caught extremely quickly. Shilian was slightly touched. If there is any new movement, we will proceed with the utmost haste on your highness's behalf, the ghost-masked man continued. Hearing this, Shilian couldn't help but say, There's no need. Please tell son Hua Chenzu that he really doesn't need to trouble himself like this. I can take care of it myself too. The result would have been the same, it just would have taken a little more time and energy. He was a titled heavenly official working for the heavens, after all. Even if he didn't have many worshippers, this was still his job. Naturally, Chenzu understands your highness is capable of doing this effortlessly, the masked man replied. But this is also precisely why he hopes my lord won't waste energy on small errands that anyone could accomplish. Your highness's time and effort should be spent on more important matters. Shilian deliberated for a moment, but in the end, he still asked, May I ask how your Chenzu is doing right now? Lang Ying nonchalantly swayed back and forth next to Shilian. Chenzu is very busy at the moment, the ghost-masked man replied. Oh, that's good, Shilian said quickly. Hopefully everything goes well for him. I wish him success. They questioned every single ghost that had been arrested, and each and every one was adamant that their product had been distributed to them by a mysterious masked individual. They didn't seem to be lying, but in a place like Ghost City, how many hundreds of masked individuals roamed the streets every day? The interrogation was fruitless, and so the ghost-masked man yanked on the chain and bid them farewell, and he led those yowling ghosts away. The 98 pieces of ghost clothing were left behind. Shilian felt that in all the years he had spent collecting old clothes, he had never seen so many in one place. As he rummaged through them, he suspected that not a single one was the real thing. Qiging, why don't you come and take a look? He said to Kung Yishen. However, Kung Yishen only scratched beneath his loose, curly hair and shook his head. Too many ghost robes. Every single piece of cloth emitted evil qi, now all intermingled. It made it impossible to tell what each one was. If someone possessed a sharp sense of taste, they would be able to differentiate between the flavors of candied pear and apple stuffing, but they could hardly do the same if 98 different kinds of fruit stuffing were mixed together and presented to them to try. Shilian tried to think of another method, but when he turned his head to look, he saw that Kung Yishen had picked up a robe and was about to try it on, then and there. Shilian hastily stopped him and hung the robe back onto the rack. Stop! Qiying, let's agree on two things. First, don't put random things in your mouth. And second, don't put on random clothes. Those are both very dangerous things to do. Kung Yishen pointed behind Shilian. And what about him? Shilian suddenly smelled something burning, and he followed the direction of Kung Yishen's pointing finger. Lang Ying had lit a match he found in some corner and was calmly setting the bottom of a hem of a ghost robe ablaze with practiced ease. Don't play with fire either? Shilian exclaimed. The ghost robe seemed to feel pain from being burned. Its hem rolled upward, and it twisted like mad, trying to get away. It looked more like a live eel than a piece of clothing. The image, surprisingly, looked rather cruel, and though Shilian could smell burning, there was no evidence of it on the fabric. It appeared that these ghost robes soaked in enough yin energy that they resisted destruction by fire. Upon hearing Shilian tell him not to play with fire, Lang Ying casually tossed the match and stepped on it to put out the flames, looking entirely obedient once more. Shilian didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and he walked over. What's with you today? He trailed off, and his face stiffened. This was because he saw, not too far away, a long piece of white fabric hanging high on a rack and gently fluttering in the night breeze. The silhouette of a human was slowly creeping across the cloth surface. This shadow had no head. Shilian pulled Lang Ying behind him. With one swift movement, he drew his sword and slashed. Everyone watch out! His swing cut the fabric and the shadow in half. However, when the cloth landed on the ground, there was nothing behind it. The headless silhouette had disappeared. Shilian had no chance to rush over and check before he felt a chill on his neck. He snapped his head back, and his pupils shrank. A beautifully dressed woman had appeared silently behind him. No, it wasn't a woman but a robe. What he had just slashed in half was also a robe, and once it fell to the ground, it was covered by other textiles. From all around, countless humanoid figures emerged, swaying and rocking slowly. gathering around the three of them. They had hung those 98 ghost robes in the yard, on the vendals, and inside the dye house, and somehow, without them realizing it, all the robes had struggled free of the racks. Shilian was dumbfounded. They were all fine before. What's going on now? Beside him came a quiet voice. The agitation of ghosts. Shilian turned his head to look, and the one who spoke was Lang Ying. Although his expression showed no unease, veins were bulging on the back of his pale hands. He was very obviously being affected by something as well. Another wave of ghost agitation. As the day when Mount Tonglu would open its gates approached, its tremors grew more and more deafening in the ears of ghosts to remind them. The first thing Shilian thought was, how is Sunlam doing? However, the current situation didn't give him much time to think. While his mind was rapidly spinning, over 20 ghost robes had already flung themselves over. Kong Yizhen swung his fists without a second thought. If that punch had landed on the wall or the ground, it would surely rock the earth. But this 1,000-pound fist collided with nothing but clothes. Even children know that in rock, scissors, cloth traps rock. And that light, malleable cloth was perfect for subduing fists. No matter how hard he launched his punch, the fabric could simply wrap around them and incur no damage. Only Shilian's sword was effective, but those ghost robes were extremely light and agile as they evaded. A simple spring backward could put over a dozen meters between them. Since they barely weighed anything, there was practically no sound or breath of air that gave away their movement. Avoiding their ambushes was much more difficult than avoiding a human opponent. Usually, it was people who picked clothes, but now it was clothes picking people. The 98 ghost robes each eagerly searched for a body that fit them, a person they fancied. Among humans, it was women who loved picking out clothes. Among ghost robes, it was the female styles that loved picking out humans. Dozens of long lady skirts, all in different colors and styles, urgently pressed themselves against Shilian. Even through the heat, even the threat of his sword couldn't force them away. It was a battle more heated than a group of women fighting over a pretty robe they fancied. Shilian was surrounded by blooming flowers and silk, squeezed between those female robes and pulled from all directions. Koyujan yanked off several pieces of children's clothing that were stubbornly trying to lower themselves over his head and tossed them aside. He was puzzled as he looked at Shilian. How come all the women's clothes like you so much? He wondered. Maybe because they think I look friendlier? Shilian answered. However, not a single ghost robe went to harass Lang Ying. Perhaps they knew he was also a ghost, and there would be no point in siphoning from him, so they didn't approach. Shilian swung his sword and sliced a number of ladies' dresses, but the robes that were cut in half still moved as they wished, their dodges even more agile. From the corner of his eye, Shilian saw several ghost robes sneaking toward the window. Close the door! Cast an array! Don't let them out! He shouted. With 2 gods and 1 ghost on hand, they could deal with the situation. But it would be a bit more difficult if the ghost robe snuck outside to seek trouble. His shout came too late, though. The dye house's yard was open air, and a long robe was already outside, fluttering its expansive sleeves. It soared into the air like a giant bat, and shot away into the night sky. Shilian groaned mentally, then shouted, Chiying! I'll leave the dye house to you! Then he pushed off with the soles of his feet and flew outside the walls, catching the bottom hem of that long ghost robe. The long robe tried in vain to flutter its sleeves as hard as it could, but with the added weight of an entire person, it couldn't help but plummet to the ground. Shilian still held its hem in a death grip, however. It was exceedingly cunning, and with a loud rip, it tore off its own corner, like a warrior chopping off his own arm. It hastily slipped away from Shilian's hand. A random passerby happened to be on his way home after a night of drinking, and he screamed in fright at the sight of a headless creature flying at him. Ah! Headless ghost! It's headless! Shilian charged over and seized the robe again, then showed it to the passerby to comfort him. Don't be scared, don't be scared. See, it's not headless. There's no body in there at all. The passerby looked, and sure enough, it was completely empty inside the folds of that robe. This was definitely more horrifying than a headless ghost, and his eyes rolled back as he fainted on the spot. Shilian quickly caught him and gently laid him on the ground. So sorry, I'll take care of this right away. After that chaos was over, Shilian could finally get to work seizing all the ghost robes that had flown out of the dye house. He counted them, making sure not a single piece was missing, before letting out a sigh of relief. With things settled, Shilian said, I suppose our only option is to use Cheeking's simple, crude method. Let's try each of these robes on and see. He wouldn't have minded putting them on himself, but that could go badly for his 2 partners. If he did actually put the brocade immortal, who knew if they would be able to deal with any accidents that might happen? In the end, they decided that he would stand watch while the other 2 dressed. Both Lang Ying and Kong Yizhen peeled off their outer robes and started trying on one robe after the other. With every new robe, Shilian would give simple commands to see if they would obey, like jump or spin around. They tried on every single one of 98 robes, both testing 40 to 50 apiece. but they didn't seem to have any strange reactions. Not a single piece in this pile of ghost robes was the brocade immortal, and they had worked all night for nothing. Both still dressed in only a single layer, Lang Ying and Kong Yushan squatted on the ground, while Shi Lian sat atop a mountain of clothes of all sorts, supporting his forehead with his hand. Shi Lian mumbled, "There really is no value in buying fakes." He sat there like that for a while before seeking out Ling Wen in the communication array. "Ling Wen, I've collected some ghost robes. Even though the real brocade immortal is probably not in the pile, they're still rather wicked and troublesome to deal with. Can you send someone down there to take them away?" "Acknowledged. I'll coordinate it promptly. How many pieces have you gathered?" Ling Wen answered. 98, Shi Lian replied. "Your Highness truly is a capable man collecting more than what I reported to you," Ling Wen remarked. Shi Lian softly cleared his throat. "It actually wasn't me." But before he could finish his sentence, a familiar chill ran down his spine. Shi Lian paused, then looked up. Upon the rows of flowy white fabrics in front of him, there was the dark, shadowed silhouette of a human. This time it wasn't headless, nor was it fluttering. The one standing behind those long curtain fabrics was very much a man, and the edges of his features could be easily distinguished, such as his remarkably tall height and the disheveled state of his hair. And that is chapter 69.